Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me once again. Now, as always, you can help our channel grow by liking, subscribing, hitting the bell for notifications, but most importantly, sharing the content. You can make a donation at paypal.me/morelogmorningdigest if you're feeling generous. We're going to jump into a topic that I really haven't talked about too much recently, but it's going to tie into recent events as well. And that is the origins of the orphan trains and how that event came to be. And recent events have definitely opened my eyes up to this. I postulated in quite a few videos earlier on in this channel's life about the orphan trains and how they came to be. And my best conclusion at the time was war. And honestly, that makes absolutely no sense to me thinking about it now, because women do not leave their children at home to go fight a war. Alright? And another thing that made me think of how this could have came to be was climate change. However, that doesn't make very much sense to me either, because children would have died too. Now, with this coronavirus, it opened my eyes, because out of the first 40,000 cases of this coronavirus, do you know how many children were infected? 0 to 11 months. There was only 9 out of the first 40,000 cases reported. Do you know how many of those kids became seriously ill? 0. Let's take that line of thinking and apply it to the orphan trains. Let's apply it to how you would get rid of a civilization as vast as Tartaria. Biological warfare seems to make the most sense, especially if you can develop something that targets the adult population and the adult population alone. Now, we have to think about the mud floods when it comes down to this as well, because there's something very interesting when it comes to the mud floods that ties right back in to this whole theory that Tartaria may have been taken down and the orphan train started by a pandemic. I have talked about accounts of a woman who was in Russia in the mid-1900s, I'd say 1920, 1930. She goes into her grandfather's basement. And guess what? It wasn't always a basement, apparently. Because when she went down there, she saw windows that still had glass in them that were covered by dirt. She asked her grandfather, "Why do you have windows down here?" And his grandfather told of a time where things became so cold and the weather changed so much that they had to insulate their house from the cold. Well, I'm going to take this and I'm going to expound upon it a little bit, because I honestly don't think that that's the only reason that these vast amounts of property were buried all over the world, mind you. It's not like it was just Russia. We see this all over the place, and on top of that, it's not in areas where there would be natural flows of mud, right? It's not like there's terrain around these areas that would lead to mud flowing downward and burying these buildings. When is the most opportune time for a virus or a disease or a contagion to spread? Cold and flu season happens in the winter, i.e., if we're being told people were burying their houses because it was too cold out, that might not be the whole story. You have to realize dirt is not only a great insulator for heat, it keeps out a lot of things, including radiation, and one would be inclined to think that it would stop bacteria or viruses from getting into your home. I honestly think that the orphan trains and the mud floods and the downfall of Tartaria are all due to a pandemic. there's also an interesting piece of information that I saw yesterday on the internet that kind of ties into this. Because as I said before, nothing new happens under the sun. So basically, the powers that be, right, they're going to use tried and true methods that they know that work over and over again, okay? Dean Koontz wrote a book back in 1981 called The Eyes of Darkness, I believe. And he describes a virus known as Wuhan 400 that was developed in a medical lab right outside of Wuhan, China. And the reason that they called it Wuhan 400 in his book is because it was the 400th sequence of this RNA virus, right? He actually refers to it as an RNA virus in this book. Now, mind you, back in 1981, they didn't have a biolab right outside of Wuhan. Wuhan was somewhat, even up until this virus, very much unknown to the outside world. Now, I'm a firm believer that you don't get to anywhere in this world, especially fame and fortune, i.e. an author, unless you sell yourself out to get there. And in doing so, I'm assuming that you would be privy to stuff that the average person like me isn't. Agenda 21, right, has been going on forever. And Dean Koontz writing about this virus way before it happens is absolutely no coincidence. You might be asking, why am I talking about this? Why is this relevant to the orphan trains? And that's because nothing new under the sun ever takes place. Cyclical events taking place over and over again, that is the definition of reality. If Dean Koontz was aware of this event taking place beforehand, right, or he has an inclination as to why the orphan trains happened, it would be very easy for him to take that framework and apply it to a book that he was writing at the time. And I'm not saying Dean Koontz had information that, coronavirus was going to happen. What I think happened is somebody read Dean Koontz's book, and instead of actually being creative themselves because they lacked the creativity, right, they just took that model and applied it to real life. Now, this may all seem convoluted, right, and all over the place, but at the same time, man, you guys need to open your eyes and realize everything in this world is tied together 100%. I have a feeling, from everything I just said, that we are witnessing the same thing that those orphans that were subject to the orphan trains and the horrific exploitation that came thereafter witness. As I said, the only logical explanation for the mass die-off of men and women while leaving children is biological warfare. And as I said, this coronavirus has direct ties back to that event simply due to the fact that out of the first 40,000 people that were infected with this, only 9 children from 0 to 11 months came down with this thing, and none of them were seriously ill. What would happen in our civilization right now if we saw a population die-off of even 2.3, 2.5%, mostly targeting adults? What would happen to their children? We would see the same thing happen, only we wouldn't be calling it orphan trains. We'd be calling it orphan planes.